Winter Roses, Summer by fairytalelovr. Chapter 14. Falling. Jon burst through the room, his blood still pumping strongly through his veins, the exhilaration of humiliating the arrogant peacock of a prince making him boil with lust. "Drea, you are dismissed," he said. "Lady Starling and I are not to be disturbed by anyone or anything until we call for you and Patrick." The former pleasure girl only smirked, leaving in a rush. Daenerys stood up from her chair with a raised eyebrow. "What are you? Oh! What's gone into you?" she asked. "Joffrey showed up at the training yard," he answered.
"And?"
she asked with a gasp. "He wanted to spar," Jon said.
"Is he alive?" Dany giggled. "That is going to bruise."
"So will his ass. And his ego. Can't say which one will be worse in the morning."
"His ego, I'll bet."
"Don't care," Jon grumbled. It was only much later that Daenerys was able to catch her breath. She lost count of how many times she reached the stars. Finally, Jon was able to carry both of them to the bed, where they lay entwined, barely having the strength to pull the fur up to their waists, the ties of his tunic irredeemably broken, and her shift torn all the way up to her hips. They cuddled together on their sides on the bed, legs tangled.
"Isla will be furious," Dany said, chuckling. "Again."
"I thought the handmaiden was the one who mended dresses," Jon asked, playing with her long silver hair.
"Usually. But Drea is helpless with the needle, so Isla is the one doing it. Patrick is not much help either. According to her, he mends as if the tear was a mammoth he was trying to vanquish." They both laughed. She said that if we continued tearing so many clothes, she'd hire a proper seamstress as a second handmaiden.
"She had better do that, if she doesn't want to be overworked,"
Jon said. "Have you no shame, Lord Starling? Savagely ripping your lady wife's clothes like this."
"No shame whatsoever. I love you, and your clothes are in the way of me worshipping you. And don't speak as if you don't rip my clothes just as often," she chuckled, sighing and cuddling deeper into his embrace, letting sleep overtake her. Smiling, Jon kissed her forehead and surrendered to sleep as well. Cersei was furious. She would have thrown something across the room, but her guest chambers were sparsely decorated, and didn't have any vases to suffer the brunt of her anger. It fell to her bedding, which she was ripping apart, angry thought by angry thought. How dare he, a bastard from an unnamed whore, to raise a sword against his prince, to beat his prince, to humiliate her precious boy, or to avenge his whore of a wife? And then the witch's words came back. "Queen you shall be, until there comes another, younger and more beautiful, to cast you down and take all you hold dear." Cersei shivered. Younger and more beautiful. A girl of 5 and 10. Pale skin, the delicate Valyrian features, the signature silver hair and amethyst eyes. Younger by 2 decades and more beautiful, and with the right bloodline to claim the throne. At least Robert hated Targaryens enough that he hadn't dared strengthen Joffrey's claim by wedding him to the dragon whore. She ripped the last shred of the bedsheet and stared at the mess for several moments. She needed to punish the bastard. Robert was too hungover to care, probably still sleeping the days of last night's welcoming feast with some whore warming his bed. To make matters worse, he'd fallen in love with the little weasel, the son of his faithful friend. Robert would do nothing. Robert always did nothing. "You, boy!" she called into the hallway. The boy, seeming about 10 years old, put down his bucket and pulled off his hat, his little hands covered in soot. Cersei showed him a gold dragon coin. "Would you like this?" He nodded frantically. "It's yours if you show me to Lord and Lady Starling's chambers." The child nodded again, hid the bucket of firewood in a corner of the corridor, and led the way. They crossed most of the entire length of the castle, dark hallways and cold spots empty for centuries. Finally, they reached what was obviously the family wing, for it was warmer and more decorated than the rest of the entire building.
Wait in here, your grace, the boy said. He looked around the corner. There's them guards, your grace. I can show you the service passages, if you please. Cersei pursed her lips. She was the queen. She could certainly force her way through the guards. At the same time, she didn't want to cause a larger scene, and she might want to see the inside of the Lord's chambers without a mess. Is it far? She asked. No, your grace. Door's right there. He pointed to a tapestry a few feet away. And from there, just to the end of the corridor. Cersei nodded, and the boy pulled the blue tapestry away, remembering to get a torch from a nearby bucket and lighting it up. They walked down the narrow passage for about 100 feet until the boy stopped behind a door. The queen wouldn't have noticed if she were there alone. He listened for a moment, then opened it carefully and poked his head into the room beyond. "'Tis empty, your grace," he said, and Cersei walked into the room. While her guest bedroom was cold and empty and unwelcoming, this room was warm and inviting. "That door there," the boy pointed. "That's them bedchamber. Dressing and studies on the sides." "Wait here," Cersei said, giving the boy the coin. He clung to it and nodded, pulling the door closed and vanishing. She walked quietly to the first door next to the fireplace. There was no sound in the room, but she didn't want to risk the guards coming in. It was a study, also well decorated. The next room was the Lord's dressing room. She left it and bypassed the chamber, going to the room on the other end. Another study, certainly the ladies. Then her dressing room, and Cersei cursed as she crossed into the next. This one was not made of the same dark rock, but rather white marble streaked with dark grey lines. But there was a pool carved into the marble, big enough to fit 2 people more than comfortably. Cersei was trembling with anger and jealousy now. She crossed the room, going to the door connecting to the last room, which could only be the bedchamber. She stopped short, biting her lips strongly, to the point of drawing blood, to prevent sound from escaping. There, laying in the huge canopied bed, were the bastard and the dragon whore, tangled together, obviously sleeping off some tryst. Her effort was not at all successful, because Daenerys stirred, groaning and burrowing deeper into her husband's arms. From her vantage point, all Cersei could see from Jon was his back, half covered by furs and the silky canopy. "Did you hear that?" the whore asked. "It was nothing. Go back to sleep," the bastard grumbled, pulling her against him. She seemed to want to protest. "Sleep, Dany. They'll wake us for supper." He kissed her forehead sweetly, and they settled back into each other. Cersei stepped back quietly, closing the door as silently as she could and almost fleeing the bathing chamber. She managed to find the right tapestry, and the boy was still there, waiting. She tossed him another coin. "Take me back to my chambers, through these passages," she barked out the order, and the boy nodded, picking up the torch and leading the way. He smartly avoided other servants, and they arrived at her guest bedchambers unseen. Cersei contemplated what to do for a moment. She could so easily push the boy down the stairs, and her little secret would be safe. She had kept her tears well guarded, but the boy knew of her excursion. But then she couldn't do it and reach for the coins at the same time, and a dead boy with 2 gold dragons in his pockets so close to her chambers would attract the wrong kind of attention. She threw the boy a 3rd coin. "For your silence." "Thank you, your grace." The boy thought of something then. "I'll make you a deal, boy. A friend of mine will look for you soon. If you tell him secrets, things that happen in the castle, then he will give you sweets and food and coins. Tell your friends, the ones you can trust to help you. Then all of you can get sweets." The boy nodded, a huge smile on his sunken, hungry face. Cersei walked into her room, yelling in pure frustration as the doors closed. "Fools! Young fools in love!" That was why her plan had failed. The dragon whore loved her bastard husband, and he loved her back. She ripped the rest of the bedding and half the pillows. But her plan might work. The boy would bring her whispers. She only needed to find someone to coordinate the children, and then send her news in King's Landing. If Varys had his little birds, why couldn't she? Robert Baratheon was a man of simple tastes. He liked wine, though he wasn't picky about the taste of the beverage. If it was well enough through the night, he'd accept even the more bitter ale, only to keep his senses dulled. And he liked his women. And he liked to hunt and eat the meat fresh, boasting of his kill. Killing and fucking, the lords would say behind his back. So, after spending his first full day at the Blessed Island, recovering from the feast of their arrival, the king organised a hunt to leave at daybreak. Joffrey had insisted to go, certainly to try and erase the image of Jon thrashing had given him. More likely to try and drive a spear through Starling's head, Theon had said. Robert snapped back that the prince was welcome to try. Bran was positively furious he was being left behind, and had complained to his father that he wasn't a baby like Rickon, who had been left alone in Winterfell with his nanny and Lady Winifred. Nor was he a girl like Arya and Sansa and the Princess Marcella. Ned had chuckled and said Bran would be old enough soon. So the 9-year-old boy took to his favourite hobby, climbing. He was well used to Winterfell's walls and towers, but the Midnight Fortress provided him with new challenges, and plentiful at that. The old Valyrian lords had had the castle built centuries before had used architecture inspired by their motherland, which meant several towers, and Ned and Benjen decided to keep with the original buildings, rather than tear everything down. Besides, if the structures had resisted 4 centuries unmanned and unmaintained, it was an indication they should keep standing. So Bran took to exploring one of the dozen round towers rising inside the keep, a bit further away from the main courtyard, lest someone see him and interrupt his fun. He was focusing on being careful, trying to learn the unfamiliar stones, so he didn't notice the 2 people talking until he was right outside the window. Robert loves the man like a brother, Cersei said, though Bran didn't recognise the voices yet.
Robert can barely stomach his brothers,
Jaime answered, scoffing. Not that he can be blamed on that account. Don't play the fool. Stannis and Renly are one thing, and Eddard Stark is quite another. Robert will listen to Stark just as easily as he will ignore the Baratheons. Damn them both. I should have insisted that he name you, but I was certain Stark would refuse him.
That's just it, isn't it? None of your thoughts have been right ever since Jon Arryn died, Jaime needled, earning himself a glare.
They were talking about father, Bran realised. He wanted to hear more. A few more feet. But these stones were new to him, and suddenly he was afraid to trust them. Several feet beneath him, Summer was pacing, whimpering. Bran wanted to shoo the direwolf away. Now more than ever he needed to go unnoticed. If Summer kept it up, the people in the tower would come to the window, and they'd see Bran hanging there. We'll have to watch him carefully, Cersei insisted.
You will watch him carefully, regardless of my opinion, Jaime said, and he sounded bored. We should go.
Ned Stark has never taken any interest in anything happening south of the Neck, she went on. Never, I tell you. He means to move against us. Why else would he have to leave his seat of power?
100 reasons. Duty. Honour. He yearns to write his name large across the book of history. To get away from his wife. Or both. Well, I suppose he did get away from his wife, sending her all the way to Riverrun. Or maybe he just wants to be warm for once in his life.
His wife is Lady Arryn's sister. It's a wonder Lysa is not here to greet us with her accusations.
Maybe that's why Catelyn left, to meet up with her sister. Console her.
Cersei laughed. Lysa Arryn is not the kind of woman who would have mourned her husband. She'd sooner rejoice his death. She ran with the boy back to the Eyrie, and that is another problem altogether. She snatched that sickly child away the moment father agreed to foster him. What if they are conspiring against us?
You're growing too paranoid. Ned Stark doesn't have the brains for a conspiracy.
Doesn't he?
Is this about the Targaryen girl again?
Jaime asked with a sigh. She is pretending, Cersei insisted. I told you.
And I told you your ingenuity shielded the girl once more. Must we really rehash this argument?
She'll come at us with renewed rage, mark my words.
Well, you had your son assault her and almost take our child from her, Jaime sneered. You insulted her as a woman and as a mother. Then he snorted. Mothers. He made the word sound like a curse. I think having a womb does something to your minds. You're all mad. He laughed bitterly. Let the little dragon grow as bold as she likes. Whatever can she do?
She has a house and an army.
1,000 swords the fat fool gave them. 1,000 swords ragtagged from other armies. That will never count for a true army.
Bran looked down to the ledge a bit beneath him. It was too far to fall, and he didn't trust these stones. They were not the grey stones of Winterfell. They were black and unknown, and not nearly as old. And he was not sure what he was hearing, but he knew it was not meant for his ears, which made him all the more eager to listen. "You're as blind as Robert," the Queen continued their conversation, unaware of their audience.
"If you mean I see the same thing, yes," Jaime replied. "I see a man who would sooner die than betray his king."
"He betrayed one already. Or have you forgotten?" "Oh, I don't deny he's loyal to Robert. That's obvious. But what happens when Robert dies and Joffrey takes the throne? What if Ned Stark decides his loyalty was to Robert, but will then change to the dragon he married to his bastard? My husband grows more restless every day. Having Stark beside him will only make him worse. He's still in love with the sister, the insipid, dead little 16-year-old. How long until he decides to put me aside for some new Lyanna?"
"You speak of Lyanna Stark, and yet you forget it was a dragon who killed her, and another who killed their father and brother. Ned Stark will never declare House Targaryen again."
"What about his son?" "I did my inquiring in Winterfell. Lord Stark never speaks of his sister. The children know that she was kidnapped and raped, and that's what ultimately led to the rebellion. But they don't resent the dragons. Not when the little bitch grew up like a sister and married their beloved bastard brother." She snorted. Catelyn Stark was a fool to allow her husband's bastard growing up under her nose.
"Robert decreed the betrothal. There was nothing she could do to keep the boy away. That didn't hold for you. And he wouldn't have dared."
"He threatened once. I told him the girl wouldn't be safe in the city. She's out of my reach, safe in the Eyrie. And it's not like I could get to the other one at Storm's End, however much I'd like to have their heads bashed in and delivered to the throne room."
Jaime shivered. Bad memories surfacing again. Little Rhaenys, butchered and wrapped in a Lannister banner, lying in front of the Iron Throne. Baby Aegon, unrecognisable after the Mountain had thrown him up against a wall, his face a shapeless lump of meat matching the red cloth. He was also surrounded by, between them, the brutalised remains of Princess Elia. No woman deserves this, he thought yet again. Outside, Bran was suddenly very frightened. He wanted nothing so much as to go back the way he had come, to find the others, hoping they had returned already. But what could he tell them? He had to get closer, Bran realised. He had to see who was talking. Jaime sighed inside the tower. "We should go back before someone realises we're gone."
"Stop that!" Cersei snapped. "You have been avoiding me ever since the first night of the first feast in Winterfell."
Jaime mumbled something Bran didn't hear, and he pulled himself up, over the gargoyle, crawling out onto the parapet, and then he moved across to the next gargoyle, right next to the window of the room they were talking in.
"I've missed you, brother," the woman said.
Bran realised they were kissing. He watched, wide-eyed and frightened, his breath tight in his throat. Jon and Dany had jumped away startled when Bran had interrupted. That, and they had been fully dressed. But these two hadn't noticed their company yet. Bran saw her face then. He recognised the Queen. He must have made a noise, because her eyes opened and she stared right at him. She screamed. Everything happened at once. Cersei pushed Jaime away, shouting and pointing. Bran tried to pull himself up, bending double as he reached for the gargoyle, but he was in too much of a hurry. His hands scraped uselessly against the smooth stone, and in his panic his legs slipped,
and suddenly he was falling. There was an instant of vertigo, a sickening lurch as the window flashed past. He shot out a hand, grabbing for the ledge, lost it, caught it again with his other hand. He swung against the building, hard. The impact took the breath out of him. Bran dangled, one-handed, panting, and slipping. Faces appeared in the window above him. The Queen. And now Bran recognised the man beside her. Jaime Lannister. He saw us! Cersei screeched, pale and panting.
So he did, Jaime said.
A million things going through his mind. Bran's fingers started to slip, and he grabbed the ledge with the other hand.
Take my hand, he said, before you fall.
Jaime seized his arm and held on tight with all his strength. Jaime yanked him up to the ledge. Very conflicted. He knew what his choices were. If people caught him and Cersei, if the boy told his father, Robert would call for Jaime and Cersei's heads immediately. That much was for certain. But how long would it take for anyone to suspect more? For someone to look at Joffrey, Tommen and Marcella differently? What are you doing? Cersei demanded, her hand clutching her chest above her racing heart.
How old are you, boy?
Jaime asked, pulling Bran to the stand on the sill. 9, Bran answered, shaking with relief. Jaime looked over at his sister.
The things I do for love,
he said with loathing. His decision made. The Stark boy versus him, Cersei, Joffrey, Tommen and Marcella. A second son. A spare heir versus Jaime's entire family. He gave Bran a shove. Screaming, the boy went backward, out of the window into empty air. There was nothing to grab onto. The black stones of the courtyard rushed up to meet him. Somewhere off in the distance, a wolf was howling. Jon was in no mood to put up with Joffrey's arrogance, and, in the end, he supposed he had gotten as much as he could back at the prince. Any more, and the king might stop ignoring. The queen would certainly openly call for Jon's and or Dany's heads. So he stayed back from the main group in the hunt, rather getting acquainted with his lands. It was the first time he was going through his woods, and he had to follow the king and his entourage and kill boars. Well, it couldn't be helped. A few miles away from the bridge, Jon and Robb started racing, as was usual between them. Their direwolves ran around them, seeming to enjoy the same friendly competition. They were passing by a rock formation when Ghost disappeared within one of the caves. Jon called him twice before dismounting and going after him, giving his reins to one of the squires, following the group. "Ghost! Ghost! Come on, boy!" Jon called, following the trail of paw prints to a cave, hearing Robb and Grey Wind follow. "Jon, you can't go in there! There's no light!" Robb said. Jon hesitated. It was true, and he had no wolf eyes. He couldn't follow Ghost through the maze-like cave drowned in darkness. "Milords?" called a squire. "I heard the wolf went right in. Would you like a light?" "Yes, thank you," Jon answered, rushing over to grab a torch. Robb took a second one and they walked into the cave, about a mile in, until Jon saw a glint in the firelight. At first, he thought it was Ghost's eyes. "Is that—" Robb whispered, shocked. "Jon, are you seeing this?" Jon crouched down as his direwolf came closer. Red eyes were shining against the torchlight, and Ghost dropped into his hands a rock he was carrying in his mouth. And then, in the distance, a wolf howled. "Summer!" Jon and Robb exclaimed at once. Dropping the rock into his pocket, Jon led the way back outside, where their group was assembling, drawn to their disappearance. "What is it?" Benjen asked. He was the closest, and had even dismounted as well, ready to follow his nephews. "That's Summer!" Jon said, his voice growing hoarse. "Something's happened to Bran!" Robb said, going up onto his wolf. "It's a wolf," Tyrick Lannister said. "Wolves howl." "Have fun on your hunt, my lord," Jon said, turning back to the castle. Ghost and Grey Wind were a few yards away already, visibly anxious. He and Robb started the trip back, and soon they heard Uncle Benjen and their father coming closer, a few others with them. Jon kicked Winter Storm into a fast gallop, racing ahead of the rest, him and the horse a unit no one could keep up with, not even Robb,
who rode one of his brothers. The villagers walking by the main road jumped out of the way as the direwolves ran by first. Two great blurs of grey and white, nearly invisible to the eye. Winterstorm's hooves echoing against the cobblestones loudly as Jon galloped close behind. He broke through the gate, leading the horse to where people were gathering, loud voices unintelligible in his panicked mind. The crowd opened up when they saw him coming, and Jon pulled the horse to a stop as the blood in his veins turned to ice. In the middle of the circle of onlookers, Ghost and Grey Worm joined Summer in guard duty as Bran's still form lay flat on the ground. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that one. Oh my god, that was intense. Oh, Bran. Oh boy. I can see Jaime's logic, but imagine that. I know it happens in the books as well, and it's one of the first big plot twists. But sweet mercy. Bran, he's only 9. One interesting thing, that rock that Ghost gives Jon, you'll see what that is in a few chapters. It's really interesting plot point though. But I can see why Jaime, he doesn't know Bran, and you can see his logic, even though it's twisted and disgusting. But leaps in logic, what can you tell? When you are emotionally invested, what makes sense is different for every individual. I'm not defending what Jaime did here, not at all. I'm just saying that as an individual, I'm good at seeing both sides of the argument. But I just wanted to sucker punch him when I first saw that. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and albino pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.